I want to highlight a clip that I do believe we spoke on briefly in the context of a larger, different segment earlier in the week, but that I think even on its own raises a great point on how we should be handling these MAGA Republicans when they attempt to snake and weasel in media. And Kaitlan Collins absolutely dismantled Mike Lawler, and we'll have a clip of Jake Tapper doing pretty well with this as well, where anytime this MAGA Republican tries to obfuscate, and anytime MAGA Republicans do this, we should be mirroring what Kaitlan Collins does here, as she does a great job just bringing it back to reality and questioning him again and making him answer rather than letting him dodge.
Every single Democrat except two voted to shut the government down, not because they didn't agree, not because they didn't. Yeah, Kaitlan.
One sitting right here.
Kaitlan,
totally different reasons.
Totally different reasons.
But you still voted the same
but Kaitlan,
way.
here's what I think you're missing.
I know 38 House Republicans
Kaitlan,
voted against
here's what you're
this.
missing.
You're counting on Democrats.
And 197 Democrats voted against
it. But the deal that they had negotiated was blown up yesterday.
They negotiated a deal that included a lot of pet projects that they wanted.
But isn't that your problem with Speaker Mike Johnson, who negotiated that deal with them?
No, look. When you have a House Republican
House Speaker negotiated that deal, right?
Would you like me to answer, or you want to debate it? House Republican majority, Senate Democrat majority, Democrat in the White House. Where has Joe Biden been in any of these discussions? What did Chuck Schumer do in any of these discussions? Nothing. So you want to just focus on House Republicans. We put a bill on the floor today to keep the government funded. Yes, some of my colleagues voted no. Some of my colleagues have never voted for a CR and never voted to increase the debt ceiling. That's their right. But the fact is, many Democrats have always voted to pass a CR and increase the debt ceiling. And the reason they didn't do that today.
I love that she continuously points out his bias and his lies by framing the conversation back to his own side's part in this, as what he's trying to do here is portray it as, well, it's all Democrats and Biden's fault, despite Biden being a lame duck president, Schumer having negotiated a bill that both him and Biden were willing to sign for funding the government, and Republicans having House majority. They should be able to pass this without a single Democratic vote. That is how you lead in the majority, especially if you're going to toss out the bipartisan deal that you negotiated with Democrats and instead choose to push forward on your own partisan legislation. You should know for a fact this will pass on party lines if that's the choice you're going to make. I mean, that's just effective governing with the majority, where the real story from this is Republicans' inability to govern and pass spending, even with the majority, their willingness to give up on it and listen to a billionaire telling them to shut it down, which would cost millions of American workers their wages, or that they tried to cut things like funding for cancer research or healthcare for 911 responders from the spending bill, which Mike Lawler disgustingly calls Democrat pet projects here, by the way. And this is masterful, right? It's per usual for MAGA, but it works. So like, you have to give them the credit, I guess, because they're doing it again where they're trying to spin the story as, well, look at the Democrats instead, this time because they voted against our partisan bill, so they have to be the bad ones. But we won't tell you that, we decided to toss out the bill that we bipartisanly negotiated with them because, well, a billionaire told us to.
I certainly understand what you're saying, but at the same time, with all due respect, sir, you're going after the top Democrat in the Senate and a lame duck Democratic president. Your conference, the House Republican Conference, we go through this every single time Republicans control the House. You guys can't pass legislation. You can't govern.
Respectfully, Jake, we've actually passed a lot of
spending legislation, government funding legislation. I'm talking about government funding legislation.
We've passed a lot of legislation that has languished down the hall in the Senate.
Government funding legislation. Every time we go through this. Every time we go through this.
Respectfully.
And I think Tapper did a really good job here as well, because you're preempting the lies that you know he's going to tell, where he tries to blame Democrats. I mean, it's the same story here, different interview, with the truth and just what's the historical reality of Republicans. I mean, throughout Biden's presidency, at least since Mike Johnson took over the House, even before then, I mean, since they took control in 2022, essentially, there's been these massive road bumps. Each time funding comes around, there's a conversation about the government might shut down. Will it? I mean, I've made multiple videos speaking on this because of that, right? Republicans are only able to ever muster up these temporary bills after weeks of scares and talks of shutdowns. This is something that you literally never see with Democrats. Can anyone name one with the House in Democratic control? And given shutdowns affect the wages of millions of Americans, it affects air travels and holiday times. I mean, that's really important for like everyone trying to go see their family. But at any time, there's many people who rely on it still. It shows which party cares about the workers. It shows which party cares about the people, and that Republicans can't even get it together enough among themselves when they have the majority to pass these things to just not scare federal workers that they'll be out of wages every 6 months or so. And, you know, with that capitalism Republicans love, it's not like those federal workers can then go to their landlord and be like, hey, I'm going to need a few weeks. I'm a federal worker, you know, like, no, they're going to be out of house and home. But even with full force legislation and policy, Republicans are ineffective at governing even in majority, something they will always try to blame on Republicans anyway, which Mike Lawler is doing here, despite the fact Biden and Democrats have already showed how ridiculous of a claim this is, passing 7 trademark major pieces of legislation, numerous smaller acts as well, including multiple bipartisan pieces of legislation with just as radical of a Republican Party, passing some of them, controlling the House and the Senate, again, still passing them on a bipartisan basis, but then also passing them with Republicans controlling the House, despite the fact, again, if we look back to 2017, 2018, when Republicans controlled all 3 under Trump, the only thing they could pass was the First Step Back in tax cuts. They literally failed to get immigration reform through committee on party lines, despite it being their party's main focus. And with Democrats controlling one branch, Republicans have never been able to pass anything. What Republican bill was passed into law through the House since 2022 midterms? They couldn't even pass immigration reform, where Democrats essentially conceded to every demand they had on the bill because, Trump told them to kill it. Meanwhile, Democrats regularly can push through policy in majorities and minorities, controlling one house instead of both, yet Republicans can't, and it's everybody else's fault but their own.